Have you ever shared a secret with someone who felt close, sincere, trustworthy, and then felt a single sentence collapse everything you had built? We trust the ones who smile beside us. We assume the ones who listen actually care. We believe the people around us every day will guard what we say. But sometimes, the closest ear is the most dangerous one. Behind the warmest smile hides the most distant heart. Sometimes, a single sentence can erase 7 years of labor. Marcus learned that in the hardest way possible. In a port city that never quieted and never emptied, there was a simple man who worked at a large distribution warehouse. His name was Marcus. For 7 years, he woke before sunrise, washed his face with cold water, ate breakfast in silence, and pulled on his faded gray vest that always carried the smell of cardboard and dust. Every day, Marcus walked the same road, passed the same corner store, greeted the same guard at the entrance, and joined the same line of workers moving pallets from one end of the floor to the other. Forklifts passed without stopping. Conveyor belts never fell silent. The loads never ended. His hands had hardened, his shoulders had locked up, and his lower back ached almost every night. But he rarely complained. He believed steady work carried its own dignity. He believed silence was strength, and he reminded himself that others had it harder. At home, a small family waited for him. His wife, who ran the household with careful hands, and his son, who ran to the door every evening before Marcus had even set down his bag, arms already open. Those moments were the reason he walked the same road again every morning, no matter how heavy the day before had been. At work, Marcus was known as quiet and dependable. He never argued, never arrived late, never caused problems. Because of this, he trusted the people around him naturally, without thinking too hard about it. Spend 7 years beside someone, and you start to believe you know them. One of those people was Cole. Being around Cole was easy. He was always warm, always asking about Marcus's family, always speaking as if he genuinely cared. Over time, Marcus began to feel he could trust Cole. But something inside Marcus had been quietly wearing down. The work had always been hard, but lately his body was responding differently. By early afternoon, his legs would give out. He tired faster than ever before, and by the time he reached home in the evenings, he could barely stay upright before sitting down. The pain in his palms had stopped fading. Rest no longer reached it. Every morning, it took a little more convincing to begin. He felt no anger toward the company, no bitterness toward his manager. But as the weeks passed, the exhaustion was grinding something down inside him. All he wanted was one lighter day, just enough for his body to catch up with itself. One evening, after a particularly difficult shift, Marcus and Cole walked out together. The sun had already dropped. At the edge of the parking lot, Marcus stopped, breathed slowly, and said something he had never said out loud at work before. He said quietly that his body was struggling, that managing the loading work had become harder, that maybe he would ask the floor supervisor for one easier shift so he could get back on his feet. He did not say he hated the job. He did not say he wanted to leave. He spoke without anger, only with honesty and tired hope. Cole nodded, put a hand briefly on his shoulder, and said everyone hits a wall sometimes. Marcus walked home feeling lighter. Being heard had felt like relief. He thought he had shared something with a friend, and that the weight had eased, at least a little. What Marcus did not know was this: Cole liked being the person with something to say. He liked the moment when others leaned in to listen. The next morning, during the break, as workers gathered around the tea station, Cole leaned close to another worker and said quietly that Marcus was struggling, that he could no longer keep up with the work. the worker looked up and asked if Marcus was thinking about leaving. Cole shrugged and said maybe he was just fed up. With that single shrug, the truth began to bend. Exhaustion became resentment. A request for one lighter shift became a plan to quit. As the hours passed and the story moved from mouth to mouth, each person added a little worry, a little assumption, a little drama. By the end of the day, the story had nothing to do with Marcus anymore. Through the night, it grew. By morning, it was out of control. One worker said Marcus was planning to leave, and another added that he was spreading low morale. The story swelled with each retelling, darkened with each new mouth. When the shift supervisor heard it, he felt he needed to act to protect his own position. He passed the concern upward, adding weight. By the time it reached the operations manager, Marcus was no longer a tired worker. He was someone poisoning the team. And no one stopped to ask Marcus, because gossip moves faster than truth and carries far less responsibility. The story eventually reached the regional director, Mr. Carroll, a proud man who valued loyalty above all else. When it arrived at his level, all he understood was threat. He did not see a tired man asking for an easier shift. He saw someone creating instability. He made his decision quickly, and he made it as a message. The next morning, Marcus arrived as usual, greeted the guard, clocked in, picked up his scanner. Before he reached the floor, two supervisors cut him off and asked him to come to the office. Inside, without being given a chance to speak, he was told he was being let go. Words like attitude, negativity, and trust were used. Marcus calmly tried to explain that all he had done was ask for one lighter shift. He had said it once, quietly. It was not a complaint. No one in that room was listening to understand. The decision had already been made. As Marcus collected his things and moved toward the door, his eyes met Cole's. Cole did not look away with guilt. He took a slow sip of his coffee and turned his head as if nothing had happened. But for a brief moment, a shadow of something unreadable crossed his face. Perhaps he had never truly understood what he had set in motion. Or perhaps he had long convinced himself that staying invisible around those with power was the only safe way to survive. His eyes, just for a second, seemed to know what his words had cost. 7 years of loyalty, lost to 7 seconds of gossip. As Marcus walked out through the entrance he had passed for 7 years, people looked and then looked away. In the days that followed, the story outside grew worse. It was said that Marcus had been cutting corners, causing problems, and that he could not be trusted. Every door he knocked on closed before he could explain. At home, his wife watched him grow quieter each week. His son stopped asking when he would go back to work. Bills piled up. Savings disappeared. The man who had once believed the world was mostly fair began to understand how quickly it could turn. After many sleepless, heavy nights, Marcus made a quiet decision, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. One morning before the city fully woke, he packed a single bag, stood for a long moment at his son's doorway, and left. Not to run, to go somewhere far enough that no one had heard his name yet. Somewhere he could start again without carrying a story that was never his.
Months later, Mr. Carroll was reviewing old records for an unrelated matter when he pulled up footage from Marcus's final weeks. What he saw was a man working quietly and alone. No confrontations, no gatherings, just the steady, careful work of someone who was clearly tired and clearly trying. As Mr. Carroll watched the security footage, there was no sound. But in the moment Marcus leaned toward Cole and spoke, the exhaustion and helplessness in his shoulders said everything words could not. He called Cole in and asked directly, what had Marcus actually said that evening? Cole answered without hesitation. Marcus had mentioned that his back was hurting
and that he wanted to ask for one lighter shift. That was all. When the truth reached Mr. Carroll, he sat quietly and thought. The man he had fired had only asked for one easier day, nothing more. Marcus was already gone. His position had been filled. His name still carried a mark in the system. There was regret, but no repair. And so the story ends with this. Not everyone who listens to you is listening for you. Words placed in the wrong hands never return to your control. And sometimes staying silent is the only protection you have against becoming the raw material of a story someone else gets to write. Because wisdom is not only knowing what to say, it is knowing who deserves to hear it.